My name is Richard Hale, and the day I stood in that courtroom, I watched my wife's face turn pale when the judge asked her just one question. She had walked in smiling confident she would walk away with half of everything I had built. Instead, her world collapsed with that single question. People talk about revenge like it's sweet, but to me it was more like a steady kind of justice, the kind that doesn't come with shouting or fists, but with patience and truth. That moment was the climax of a story that started months earlier when I thought I'd finally found love again. I was 55 years old, a widower for almost 7 years, and the kind of man people in Charlotte, North Carolina knew as old money, though the truth was I had earned every cent myself. I had started with one rundown duplex on the east side of town back in my 20s and turned it into a small real estate development firm. I wasn't the richest man in the state, but I was comfortable. My kids were grown, my daughter teaching high school English in Raleigh, my son working as an engineer in Asheville. They checked in on me, but mostly they lived their lives as they should. After my wife passed, the house got too quiet. You come home to silence enough nights in a row, and you start to wonder if maybe companionship is worth more than solitude. That was when Amanda entered my life. She was in her mid-30s, pretty in the kind of way that draws attention when she walks into a restaurant, tall, sharp dresser, blonde hair, always styled just so. We met at a charity event downtown. She was a consultant, though exactly what she consulted on never seemed clear. She laughed easily at my jokes, told me I didn't look a day over 45, and acted impressed by the simplest things, like the way I ordered wine without glancing at the menu. After years of being alone, that kind of attention was intoxicating. We dated a few months. She liked nice restaurants, shopping trips, weekends in Asheville at bed and breakfast. I enjoyed spoiling her, and I won't deny it, I liked being seen with her. For a while I told myself this was companionship, not love, and I was content. Until the night she sat across from me at dinner, her eyes wide and her voice trembling as she whispered, "Richard, I'm pregnant." The word hit me like a freight train. Pregnant. At my age, with my life finally in order, I wasn't expecting to hear it again. My mind went spinning back to when my kids were small, the smell of baby powder, the nights pacing the floor with colic. I should have asked more questions, I should have slowed down, but instead all I could think was, do the right thing. My parents raised me old-fashioned. If a man creates a child, he marries the mother. That's how it was, no excuses. Amanda played her role perfectly. She cried, said she hadn't planned it, but that she'd raise the child with or without me. She said she didn't want to pressure me, but her eyes begged me to. And I fooled that I was put my hand over hers and promised, we'll do this together. Within 2 weeks, we were married. A small courthouse ceremony, though Amanda insisted on a lavish reception at a hotel ballroom a month later. She paraded me around like a trophy, introducing me as her husband, gushing about how excited she was to start a family. Friends and neighbors congratulated us, though a few of my closest friends pulled me aside with skeptical looks. Richard, one of them, whispered, "You're sure about this? You've only known her a few months." I brushed it off. I wanted to believe I'd been given a second chance at happiness. But from the start, there were cracks. Amanda pushed to merge our bank accounts. She wanted me to put her name on the deed to my house. She started talking about private schools for the baby, about maternity shopping trips, about moving into a larger property with more land. And yet, whenever I suggested going with her to the doctor for an appointment, she'd say, "Oh, don't bother. It's just routine blood work." Or, "They're running behind, no reason for you to sit around." I told myself it was just independence, but something in the pit of my stomach churned. One evening after she'd gone to bed, I sat in my den, staring at an old photo of my late wife. I remembered how different it had felt then, the honesty, the transparency, the way we both stumbled into parenthood, wide-eyed but together. With Amanda, it felt like I was walking on a stage where the lines had already been rehearsed, and I was the only one who hadn't read the script. The doubts grew, and yet I buried them. I told myself loneliness was worse than uncertainty. I told myself maybe this was simply what love looked like the second time around. Still, I started to keep records, receipts, bank statements, little notes about what Amanda said and when. Not out of paranoia, I claim, but just in case. Deep down, though, I think I already knew. The story of my so-called second chance was not going to end the way Amanda imagined. I didn't sleep much after that first month of marriage. Little things, the kind you can't explain without sounding petty, kept stacking up. Amanda kept her purse with her, even when she went to the bathroom. She angled her phone just out of view when a text came in, then smiled too brightly and said it was a baby app reminder. When I offered to set up a shared calendar for doctor visits, she said her clinic didn't like spouses cluttering the waiting room. I've spent a lifetime reading houses and job sites. I can feel when a floor looks solid but flexes underfoot. That's how our life began to feel painted straight lumber, not true. The money talk never really stopped. She wanted to convert my individual account into a joint one because families don't keep score. She asked about the lake house I used as a weekend rental and suggested we put it in both our names before the baby comes. When I hesitated, she pouted and blamed hormones. Then minutes later, she'd bounce back texting me links to designer strollers and nursery chandeliers. I wrote checks for the small things and dodged the big ones, telling myself it was temporary, just the turbulence of change. On Sundays at church, people clasped my shoulder and said they were praying for the baby. Our pastor's wife pressed a knitted blanket into Amanda's hands. Amanda teared up and asked me to take a picture. Folks from the old neighborhood brought pies and hand-me-downs. Their warmth stung. So many honest people were rooting for something that didn't feel honest. I started leaving the house early under the pretense of checking job sites and walked slow laps at Freedom Park instead under the oaks trying to think straight. You don't get to 55 without learning the difference between nerves and instinct. This wasn't nerves. It was the quiet sound a rotten beam makes when you tap it hollow where it should be solid. My sister Lynn noticed first. She stopped by one afternoon with a pot of vegetable soup the way she had since my wife died. While Amanda was upstairs napping, Lynn lowered her voice and asked if I was okay. I told her we were fine, just adjusting. She stirred the soup too long, not buying it. "You've got that look," she said. "The one you had when a contractor tried to pass off cheap lumber as premium." I laughed it off, but later that night I texted her, "You ever hear of clinics that don't want husbands at appointments?" She sent back a single word, "No." The timeline kept wobbling. 1 week, Amanda announced she was 9 weeks along. 2 days later at dinner with friends, she told someone she was already in her second trimester. I saw Carrie from choir tilt her head just slightly the way people do when something doesn't add up. Amanda gushed over spinach salads and avoided wine with theatrical regret, but twice I found empty mini champagnes in the garage trash. When I asked, she said they were from before. Before what, she didn't say. I suggested we tour a birthing center. She clapped her hands and walked it back right away. Her doctor was hospital only. I asked for the doctor's name so I could add it to my emergency contacts. She rattled off Dr. Bennett at South Ridge. I wrote it on a sticky note, and after she fell asleep, sat in my den under the soft hum of the grandfather clock and looked it up. There was no obstetrician named Bennett at South Ridge. There was a Dr. Benning Pediatrics. The foundation in my gut shifted. The next morning, I pretended to forget my briefcase and doubled back after leaving for work. Through the cracked kitchen door, I watched Amanda's phone tucked to her ear. I told him the clinic doesn't do spouses, she said, voice flat, a tone I'd never heard from her in public. "No, he's slow-rolling the deed. I need the lake place in my name before we file." She paused, listening. "A week, maybe 2. He still thinks I'm pregnant." She laughed short and efficient, then hung up and hummed while she loaded the dishwasher. People imagine rage as shouting. Mine arrived as stillness. I set the briefcase down, turned around, and left again, quiet as if I'd never come back. For 2 days, I said nothing. I worked like I always do. Drove site to site, talked to foremen about plumbing rough-ins and roof pitches. In the spaces between errands, I copied our financial statements and photographed everything valuable in the house. The twilight hours felt different, sharper. The spell was breaking. That Friday, I called my attorney, Howard Green, a man with white hair and a voice like an oak floor, solid, no creaks. Howard had helped me draft wills and negotiate contracts for 20 years. He cleared his afternoon, and I sat across from him in the same leather chair I'd sat in as a younger man. I told him everything. He didn't say "I told you so." He just listened, then slid a legal pad toward me. "First things first," he said. "Don't confront her. Don't tip your hand." He drew boxes for each asset: primary residence, lake house, business interests, retirement accounts, and a timeline. We move what can be moved legally and cleanly. Trust for the kids. A separate operating company for new projects. Keep marital funds separate and small. If she files, we want the facts to be boring. "What about the baby?" The word felt heavy and embarrassing coming out of my mouth. We ask for medical verification through counsel, he said. If there is a pregnancy, we act accordingly. If there isn't, the truth will come to light. He held my gaze. You didn't do anything wrong by believing Richard. Don't let shame drive the bus. I left his office steadier than I'd felt in weeks. I drove to a locksmith and changed the keypad code on the lake house. I called my accountant and scheduled a routine audit, not because the books were dirty, but because clean lines make for clean stories, if anyone ever asks. That evening, Amanda floated into the living room in a new dress and asked if we could stop by a friend's party. On the drive, she placed my hand on her stomach and said she thought she felt flutters. I looked out at the longleaf pines and murmured something noncommittal. At the party, she allowed herself half a flute of champagne for a toast and strutted through conversations, dropping phrases like our baby and nesting. People congratulated us. I smiled politely and filed the moment away. 2 nights later, I met Lynn at our mother's old house, which I use as an office annex. I showed her the copied bank statements and the sticky note with the doctor's name. Lynn pressed her lips together the way she did when we were kids, and I'd tried to glue a broken chair instead of fixing it properly. You always said you could tell good lumber by its sound, she said. What does this sound like? I tapped the sticky note on the desk. It sounded like air. The next morning after Amanda left for an early scan, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and called Southridge Medical. May I speak with Dr. Bennett's office? I asked. The receptionist paused, then said kindly that no such physician worked there. I thanked her and hung up. The kitchen clock ticked out 30 long seconds. I opened my laptop and searched for private investigators in Charlotte, then closed it again. I didn't need someone to tell me what I already knew. But I did need proof strong enough to survive a courtroom and the scrutiny of people who had believed in us, people I respected. Howard's words kept circling back. Keep the facts boring. Don't tip your hand. So I made lists. I labeled files. I slid a fresh legal pad into the top drawer beside a small envelope for receipts. I told Amanda I'd be busy on a renovation in Plaza Midwood for a couple of weeks, and she should focus on rest. She kissed my cheek and handed me a list of nursery items with prices circled in red. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its patient whir. I thought about my first marriage, late-night feedings bills we paid in quarters, a small life that felt large because it was honest. I thought about how age sharpens some things and softens others. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted solid ground under my feet again. If this was a house with rot inside the walls, I would open the drywall neatly, not swing a hammer wild. I would be patient. I would be exact. And when the time came, I would let the truth carry its own weight. The first time I knew for certain was a Thursday morning in late October. Amanda said she had a doctor's appointment at 10 and insisted she drive herself. I waited until she pulled out of the driveway, then followed a couple of blocks back, careful not to be seen. Instead of turning towards South Ridge, she drove across town, parked near a coffee shop, and sat for 45 minutes scrolling her phone. No clinic bag, no paperwork, no nurse calling her name. Just cappuccinos and a croissant. My heart didn't sink, it hardened. I pulled over a street away, hands on the wheel, and thought of my kids. What would I tell them if they asked why I hadn't seen this sooner? Shame runs deeper than anger. I'd let myself believe because believing was easier than facing loneliness. And Amanda knew it. That realization was worse than any slap in the face. That evening when she came home chirping about blood work, I nodded, kissed her cheek, and asked if she wanted spaghetti for dinner. She smiled, poured herself a glass of wine, then caught herself switching to water. I logged that too. The next day I met with Howard again. He didn't look surprised when I told him what I'd seen. Then we gather evidence, he said, quietly. You'll need documentation airtight enough to hold up in court. He recommended a licensed investigator, a man named Frank Wilson, ex-cop, silver hair, the kind of handshake that makes you believe he's seen it all. Frank didn't waste words. Give me 2 weeks, he said. You'll know more than you want to. 2 weeks later, Frank slid a manila folder across Howard's desk. Inside, time-stamped photos of Amanda walking into a lawyer's office downtown, smiling like she owned the place. Screenshots of her social media activity during hours she claimed to be in medical appointments. A note from a nurse at South Ridge confirming no patient file under her name. Frank had even caught her at a wine bar with a man she claimed was her cousin. They were holding hands under the table. I stared at the folder until the words blurred. Howard tapped the cover. You don't confront her, You prepare. Preparation meant moving assets. My company books were clean, but we added an extra layer separating projects into limited liability companies, funneling income into trusts earmarked for my children. The lake house title shifted quietly into my daughter's name, with me retaining life tenancy. Retirement accounts were tightened with beneficiary designations locked in. To the outside world, it looked like estate planning. To Amanda, it looked like nothing at all. At home, Amanda kept pressing. "When are we adding my name to the deed?" she asked one night as we folded laundry. I shrugged, saying my lawyer was backlogged. She rolled her eyes and muttered about men dragging their feet. She pressed again when holiday cards came in, suggesting we send them out as Mr. and Mrs. Hale, soon-to-be parents. I agreed, though the taste of the words soured in my mouth. The mask began to slip. She snapped at waiters, belittled the cashier when a coupon didn't work, and one night screamed at me for leaving my boots by the back door. It wasn't pregnancy hormones, it was entitlement. Still, I kept my voice level, my eyes steady as though I hadn't seen the folder of evidence in Howard's office. Then one crisp morning, I found the envelope on the front porch Amanda had filed for divorce. No warning, no conversation. Inside were papers demanding half of everything, my home, my business, even spousal support. Her attorney's letter claimed she was carrying my child and needed financial stability. I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out while the coffee pot burbled. Strangely, I didn't feel broken. I felt calm. She thought she had me cornered, but I'd already built my exit 2x4 by 2x4. Howard chuckled when I showed him the papers. "She jumped the gun," he said. "Filing this early without verification is reckless. Let her dig her own hole." He drafted our response, measured factual, requesting medical records and financial disclosures. Nothing flashy, just steady pressure. The kind that cracks a weak foundation. At dinner that night, Amanda smiled across the table, pretending nothing had happened. "I had to do what's right for me and the baby," she said, spearing asparagus. "You'll see, the court will understand." I looked at her, really looked, and wondered how many people had fallen for that same smile. Maybe I said quietly, but the truth has a way of standing up straighter than lies. She frowned, not quite sure if it was a threat or a proverb. I let the silence sit heavy as bricks. In the days that followed, Amanda grew bold, ordering furniture for a nursery, calling contractors about remodeling our home. She was rehearsing for a life she thought was already hers. But every call, every receipt, every little overreach was just more weight added to the lie she'd built. And I knew weight like that doesn't hold, it buckles. The courtroom was coming, and so was the question she couldn't answer. Howard always said the strongest defense is preparation, not confrontation. So I kept playing my role, the steady husband who didn't suspect a thing, while in reality every move I made was calculated. We began by restructuring my holdings. My construction company, Hale Properties, had several projects under one umbrella. Howard filed paperwork splitting them into separate LLCs, each with its own books, its own bank account. Then we created trusts in my children's names with me as trustee. That meant the assets weren't mine alone anymore. They were legally bound to my kids. Amanda couldn't touch them. Next, the real estate. The lake house, her favorite subject, was quietly transferred to my daughter, with language allowing me lifetime use. From the outside, it looked like a father planning his estate. Amanda didn't blink when I mentioned my accountant wanted to streamline things for taxes. She never asked for details. Meanwhile, I left just enough in the joint account to pay for groceries and gas, maybe a new dress here and there. I made sure she still felt indulged, because the more comfortable she was, the less she looked for cracks. Amanda's behavior was predictable. She grew bolder, even smug. One evening over dinner, she announced she'd spoken to a decorator about turning the guest room into a nursery. She listed off paint colors, cribs, rocking chairs. I nodded as though I cared, while inside, I thought of Frank's folder of photographs, Amanda sipping cocktails with her so-called cousin, no baby bump in sight. The charade became almost unbearable. Friends congratulated us in grocery store aisles, slipping me advice about diaper brands and pediatricians. Amanda would beam, rubbing her flat stomach while I forced a smile. Each public moment was another log tossed onto the fire of her lie, one that would eventually burn her world down. The breaking point came a week later. Amanda confronted me in the kitchen, waving a glossy magazine. "Richard, why haven't you put me on the deed yet? Don't you trust me?" Trust. The word landed sharp. I swallowed my anger and kept my voice even. "Howard says we should wait until after the baby's born. Less paperwork that way." Her eyes narrowed. Howard always says something. Yes, I replied. That's why I pay him. She stormed off, muttering under her breath. I knew what was coming next. Howard had predicted it. She would file for divorce the moment she realized she wasn't getting her name on the house. Sure enough, 2 days later, a courier arrived at my office with a thick envelope. Amanda had filed demanding half of everything: assets, spousal support, even a claim on my business. Her petition painted her as a vulnerable, expectant mother, abandoned by a cold, wealthy husband. She wanted the court to grant her security. I sat with the papers spread across my desk. Some men might have felt rage. What I felt was vindication. The game was no longer in whispers and innuendo. It was on record in black and white. And I had been waiting for this. Howard read the petition and smirked. She overplayed. Claimed pregnancy without attaching medical verification. Judges don't like that. We'll ask for documentation through discovery. He drafted our response: calm, factual, requesting proof of pregnancy and financial disclosures. No drama, no anger, just the slow tightening of a vice. At home, Amanda pretended nothing had changed. She still cooked dinners, still chatted about baby names. She even placed my hand on her stomach one evening, saying she felt movement. I left my hand there steady, though I knew it was theater. She smiled, thinking she had me fooled. Behind her smile, though, I noticed something else, a flicker of nerves like a poker player bluffing with a weak hand. She knew the question would come. She just didn't know when. The holidays approached, and with them court dates. Our first hearing was scheduled in January after the new year. Amanda spent December telling friends she couldn't wait for our baby's first Christmas. Meanwhile, I spent it meeting with Howard, scanning documents and preparing witnesses. On Christmas Eve, my daughter asked gently over the phone, "Dad, are you happy?" I paused too long before answering. Finally, I said I will be. And I meant it, because while Amanda thought she was closing in on her prize, the truth was lining up brick by brick, ready to crush her lies under its own weight. The trap had been set. The courtroom would spring it. January in Charlotte has a way of cutting through your coat, the kind of cold that makes even the courthouse steps feel unwelcoming. I walked up those granite stairs with Howard at my side, steady as a metronome, while Amanda strutted ahead in a fur-collared coat. She carried herself like someone about to collect a prize. Her lawyer, a slick younger man with a shiny tie, nodded confidently to colleagues in the hall. To them, I was just another older fool who'd been outmaneuvered by a younger wife. Inside the courtroom, the wood paneling smelled faintly of lemon polish. A handful of spectators filled the benches, mostly other families waiting their turn. Judge Carter presided from the bench, a tall man with a lined face and sharp, clear eyes that missed nothing. He glanced at us, then at the docket. Amanda's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth as syrup. "Your Honor, my client has been subjected to emotional distress and financial uncertainty due to Mr. Hale's unwillingness to provide security during her pregnancy. She seeks an equitable division of marital property, half of all assets and spousal support, to ensure the well-being of their unborn child." Amanda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue for effect. I stayed still, hands folded, face calm. Howard rose, slowly adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, we are prepared to address all claims, but before we discuss division of property, we respectfully request verification of the alleged pregnancy that forms the foundation of these claims." A murmur rippled through the room. Amanda's lawyer shifted but recovered quickly. "My client is indeed expecting. The stress of this situation has made medical visits difficult, but we assure the court." Judge Carter raised a hand. His voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Hale, could you provide the name of your obstetrician and the date of your most recent prenatal appointment?" The room seemed to still. Amanda's tissue froze halfway to her cheek. She blinked once, twice, lips parting, but no words coming out. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She stammered, "It's Dr. Bennett at South Ridge." Howard's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He slid a paper from his briefcase. "Your Honor, South Ridge has confirmed there is no obstetrician by that name, nor any record of Mrs. Hale as a patient." Judge Carter leaned forward, eyes locked on Amanda. "Mrs. Hale, I'll ask again. Who is your doctor?" Amanda's face flushed red, then drained white. Her hands trembled. She glanced around as though searching for an exit, but there was none. Her lawyer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could." The judge's gavel struck lightly. "Enough. This court does not tolerate deceit. If there is no pregnancy, then the basis for these claims collapses. I expect honesty in my courtroom. Mrs. Hale, I strongly advise you to consider the consequences of further misrepresentation. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Amanda's eyes darted toward me wide and panicked. I held her gaze without blinking. For the first time since we met, she looked small, fragile, not because she was vulnerable, but because the performance had crumbled. Howard rose again, voice even. Given these circumstances, we request the court dismiss her claims for spousal support tied to alleged pregnancy and proceed with asset evaluation based on documented contributions which are minimal. The judge nodded. So ordered. We'll reconvene for further division hearings, but the record will reflect this finding. He banged the gavel, once sealing her fate. As people filed out, whispers chased Amanda like shadows. She clutched her purse, head down. Her lawyer avoided eye contact. I walked past them slowly, every step measured. No gloating, no words, just the quiet satisfaction of truth doing its work. Outside, the winter sun was bright but cold. Howard clasped my shoulder. She thought lies could build a house. You showed her the foundation was rotten. I nodded, breathing in the crisp air. Justice doesn't need fireworks, just patience. But inside, I felt the shift the tide had turned. Amanda had been exposed, and the world she'd built on deception was collapsing. And it wasn't over yet. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled of coffee and cold air, the kind of institutional scent that clings to coats in January. Amanda stood with her back to the wall phone, in hand, eyes glossy. Her lawyer whispered sharply, and she nodded without hearing a performer still hunting for her next line after the audience has already left. Howard and I stepped into an empty conference room to plan what came next. The adrenaline of the hearing eased, replaced by a clean, steady focus. The showmanship was over. Now it was paperwork and proof. Howard spread a checklist on the table. Discovery, he said. We'll formalize every request medical records communications with her attorney prior to filing financial statements and any correspondence referencing pregnancy. He pointed to a line item. We'll also notice Frank for deposition. Photos, timelines, third-party confirmations. No loose corners. I thought about the knitted blanket our pastor's wife had given Amanda, the grocery store congratulations the cards addressed to the Hales expecting. Lies don't just wound the target, they wound everyone who believed. Make it airtight, I said, for the court and for the people she used. Over the next weeks, truth marched in like a line of workers, clocking in on time, sworn statements from South Ridge confirming no patient record, appointment logs from the coffee shop during the hours she claimed to be at ultrasounds, credit card receipts for wine bars, screenshots of messages to her cousin with heart emojis, and plans for a weekend when the dust settles and the money's sorted. Frank's photographs were clinical, date-stamped angle, consistent, the eye of a cop who knows his evidence has to survive cross. Amanda pushed back at first. Her lawyer filed a motion to limit discovery, calling it intrusive. Judge Carter denied it without ceremony. Then came the deposition. In Howard's office, with a court reporter tapping quietly, Amanda swore to tell the truth. Howard's questions were gentle, unhurried, each one a measured tap on a hollow beam. Who is your obstetrician? On what date did you confirm the pregnancy by blood test? Which pharmacy filled your prenatal prescription? She fumbled, corrected herself, invented a last name that didn't exist, then retracted it. When Howard slid the Southridge letter across the table, she went very still. Her lawyer requested a break. In the hallway, he spoke to her in low-clipped tones that carried anyway. You lied under oath. When they returned, she stared at the table and said nothing while her attorney withdrew several of her prior statements, pending further clarification. Clarification never came. Never. The final hearing on support and division felt less like a showdown and more like a closing inspection. Judge Carter was brisk. He noted the short duration of the marriage, the lack of commingled major assets, the trusts established for my children prior to filing, and the absence of any credible evidence supporting pregnancy. He struck her claim for spousal support, citing misrepresentation. He refused attorney's fees. He warned in careful, measured words that the record could be referred to the district attorney if he concluded there was deliberate fraud upon the court. The benches shifted with the sound of people sitting up straighter. Amanda's hands shook as she signed the final order. She was awarded what the law allowed after a brief marriage with no contributions, her personal clothing, and effects a modest distribution from the small joint account, half of a single month's utility refund. It read like an inventory list stripped of the drama she'd hoped to script. When the judge finished, he looked at me for a beat longer than necessary, as if to say, "You did the right thing the right way." Outside, winter sun slid across the plaza, bright as a new sheet of drywall. Howard exhaled. "Clean and proper," he said. "Exactly how it should be." I nodded. There was no triumph in me, only relief. Justice, when it lands properly, makes a quiet sound. It wasn't over, not entirely. The gossip traveled faster than any order. Charlotte isn't a small town, but church circles and charity boards might as well be. People who had posted congratulations on Amanda's social media deleted them. Others called me privately embarrassed. I told them the same thing: let's be kinder next time with our certainty. I wasn't going to turn their sympathy into a parade. I just wanted the noise to die down. My daughter drove in from Raleigh the following weekend. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee and cinnamon rolls, the house warmer than it had felt in months. She studied my face like a detective reading a blueprint. "You're steadier," she said. "Even your shoulders are lower." We walked the yard, pruning back winter shrubs. At the curb, she touched my arm. "Dad, I'm proud of you for staying decent." That word "decent" lodged in my chest and warmed me from the inside. My son called from Asheville. Engineers aren't big talkers about feelings, but he said enough. "You could have torched her, made it messy," he said. "You didn't." We talked about work, then fishing in the spring. When we hung up, the house didn't feel empty. It felt quiet the way a chapel feels quiet, a place where noise has been asked kindly to wait outside. Amanda texted once. A long message that began with justification, stress, confusion. Things got out of hand and ended with accusation. I stared at the bubbles on my phone until they cooled into gray. Then I wrote back a single sentence. "I wish you the courage to tell yourself the truth." I blocked her number after I hit send, not out of anger, but because construction is impossible if you keep reopening the hole you've just framed. Frank delivered his final invoice with a short note. "You held the line." Howard sent a neat folder with stamped copies of every order and a cover letter that said in his careful handwriting, "When people show you who they are, let the paperwork remember." I slid the folder into my safe, not because I wanted to revisit it, but because some truths deserve to be preserved, even if you hope you'll never need them again. One evening I drove to the lake house. The keypad code, now my daughter's to share, clicked open. Winter light lay quiet on the water, a pewter sheet stretching to the far shore. I built a small fire and sat with a legal pad on my knee, not to make lists this time, but to draw a new plan. Not for businesses or trusts, those were settled, but for time. Suppers with my daughter twice a month. A spring project with my son rebuilding the old dock. Sundays staying past the last hymn to talk with folks who needed to. Work that didn't require a hard hat showing up. On the mantel was the knitted blanket from our pastor's wife, folded neatly where Amanda had left it during her performance. I ran my hand across the small stitches. Then I wrote a note and tucked it under the ribbon to return it to the giver with thanks and no explanations. Not everything needed a footnote. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do with a lie is quietly remove its props. I slept hard that night for the first time in months, the kind of sleep you get when the roof doesn't leak and the foundation rests level on bedrock. In the morning, frost steamed off the dock as the sun reached over the trees. I poured coffee and stood at the window. I didn't feel victorious. I felt capable again, like a man whose house had passed inspection. Back in town, the chatter died. People moved on as they do. I walked into church and found the same old pew. After the service, the pastor shook my hand and said nothing about court. He asked if I would help repair the ramp out back. I said yes gladly. We fixed the sagging joist, anchored the railing, swept the shavings. Work like that cures a lot of things. When I drove home that afternoon, I realized the part of me that had once needed to be seen at the charity dinners, in the shiny restaurants, had gone quiet. A different part spoke up, older and less showy: build what lasts. Tell the truth, be patient, and when the time comes, let a single good question do what 1,000 accusations never will. I never believed in clean slates, not really. Life doesn't erase, it layers. But after the final hearing, when the gavel fell, and Amanda walked out pale as chalk, something inside me did shift. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was the quiet certainty that I still had control over my own story. The weeks that followed were ordinary in the best way. I cooked my own suppers, simple things like pot roast and cornbread. I drove out to job sites, walked through half-framed houses, and smelled sawdust in the cold morning air. Work had always been my anchor, and now it felt even steadier, as if the ground had been cleared of debris. One Saturday, my daughter drove down from Raleigh with her boyfriend. We sat on the porch wrapped in blankets sipping cocoa. She studied me the way she used to as a girl when she was trying to guess my mood. "Dad," she said, "you don't look weighed down anymore. I can see Mom in your eyes again." That night I lay awake thinking about my late wife, how she'd raised our children with honesty, how she'd laughed without calculation, how she'd never once made me doubt her word. For the first time in years, remembering her brought comfort instead of ache. It reminded me of the kind of love worth protecting and the kind of love not to settle for. Amanda's name still floated around town, mostly in whispers. Some people looked at me with pity, others with a sort of respect. I didn't dwell on either. Gossip comes and goes. What mattered was what remained: my children, my friends, my integrity, my work. One evening, Howard invited me to supper at his house. His wife made fried chicken and collard greens, the kind of meal that makes a man feel rooted. Afterward, Howard poured us 2 bourbons and leaned back. "You know," he said, "you handled this better than most. Plenty of men would have gone scorched earth." I shrugged. Anger builds nothing. I wanted her exposed, not destroyed. He nodded slowly. "There's wisdom in that." That word wisdom meant more to me than any verdict. It was the kind of respect you can't buy, only earn by living long enough and choosing decency when bitterness tempts louder. In March, my son came down from Asheville. We drove out to the lake house with tools rattling in the truck bed. The dock had sagged, boards warped from winters. Together we pulled nails, cut new planks, and rebuilt it, beam by beam. The work was slow, steady, honest. By the end of the day, we stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out across the water as the sun fell low. He said quietly, "You did right, Dad. You taught me more by how you handled her lies than if you'd shouted or cursed." That was the real inheritance I wanted to leave, not the houses or the accounts, but the example. That when someone wrongs you, you can still choose dignity. That revenge isn't about fire, it's about truth revealed in daylight. I thought often about Amanda, not with longing, not even with hatred, just with a sober kind of pity. I wondered if she ever looked in the mirror and saw what she'd become. I hoped she'd find a way back to honesty, though I doubted she would. Her world had been built on shortcuts, and shortcuts rarely led home. Spring warmed the air. Azaleas bloomed along the sidewalks. One Sunday after church, the pastor stopped me at the door. "Richard," he said, "I know you've been through the fire. Would you consider sharing a word at Men's Fellowship next month about trust, about resilience?" I agreed. And when the day came, I stood in the fellowship hall, paper cup of coffee in my hand, and told my story, not the gossip version, not the courtroom drama, but the quiet truth. About loneliness, about being fooled, about the danger of rushing what should take time. The men listened, some nodding, some with their eyes lowered, maybe remembering their own missteps. When I finished, I said, "The lesson isn't that women can't be trusted. The lesson is that we must be careful with our hearts and honest with ourselves. Wealth can attract lies, but wisdom can uncover truth." Afterward, one older man came up, gripping my hand tight. "I wish I'd heard that 30 years ago," he said. His eyes were wet. Driving home that night, windows down, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of clarity. So here's what I want to leave you with, friend, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. Don't let loneliness blind you. Don't hand over trust just because someone smiles the right way or says the right words. Protect what you've worked for, yes, but more importantly, protect your heart. And if you're ever betrayed, don't let it turn you bitter. Let it turn you wiser. I'm Richard Hale. This was my story. What about yours? Have you ever seen someone trapped by lies or found the courage to walk out of one yourself? Share it, because your story may help another. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, stick around. There's always another chapter, another lesson.